Welcome everybody to this week's tutorial video. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to take you behind the scenes on custom executive development. And so I'm going to be fielding questions from actual real live consultants and coaches who are curious around how do you take a coaching gig and turn it into a more extensive consulting engagement with working with teams and broader development as a group. So that's what we're going to be working on. I'm going to start off though with kicking it over to Dawn, who is the one who raised the question. Oh, actually, let me first introduce you who's on the call with me. So I'm Betsy Jordyn, as you all know, because you're on my YouTube channel and on my list. Dawn, do you want to introduce yourself, and then Rachelle, and then Dawn, you could ask your question.
Yes, my name is Knagge. I'm an executive leadership coach with a PCC, and I am here today because Betsy is one of those brilliant organizational development people that continues to blow my mind, and so I'm here to learn.
And the check is in the mail. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, exactly what Dawn said, but with a different name. My name's Rachelle Stone, and I am a burnout prevention coach and also an executive leadership coach for small business owners and entrepreneurs. And I too am, Betsy's knowledge it's just never ending. It's an ocean. So excited to be able to have this open dialogue and ask some questions and get some more learning from you.
And snaps to you on getting to the point of saying burnout prevention coach. That was brilliant. We worked a lot on your brand to get you to the point of that clarity, and that was awesome. So snaps to you. That was
Actually,
really
I made a note of that.
Yeah.
I wear it proudly now. It took me a while, but it took me years, but I am wearing it now.
Yeah. That is really awesome.
And the truth is that I guess I haven't spent enough time, but for me, it would be about recreation. Mm-hmm. And it's putting that into my my statement, so to speak, my why. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up.
So what I like about what we're starting off here is, here's the thing with coaching, that a lot of times people become coaches because they have a life story and a bigger mission of what they want to do in the world. So we're starting off with Rachelle saying burnout prevention coach because there's a very personal aspect of the mission. And for you, Dawn, one of the things that you're amazing at is how to recreate lives from soup to nuts. You know how to take somebody who's a mid-career person who's just not happy and recreate every aspect of their life into one they actually love and don't want to escape from. But at the same time, you get attracted, or people get drawn to you who are more corporate. And, sometimes it's just good to make the most out of those experiences. And so that's what we're here for, is like, well, how do you take these particular gigs? So whether this might be your path of saying, I want to be an executive leadership coach and executive leadership consultant, or I want to make the most of these so that I could really focus more on the passion part of my business and attracting individuals. So it can work either way. So why don't we start off with you, Dawn, on your question around why we're even here and what brought us to this point? Like, what have you been doing with a client and what are your questions?
Yeah, so a big part of my coaching is in executive presence, and I'm working currently with a large wealth management company, and I'm doing a lot of their executives. And because I've had the opportunity to work with a number of them, what I've learned is that they are not aligned in what the company's values are. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that the company actually knows how to organizationalize their values. So that's the first question is how do you really, what is a great way to be able to bring that full circle and understanding so people in their roles know exactly what those values are, how they're aligned to them? And then the second is that, how does that look if you were to move them into competencies? How does that show up?
Got it. So sounds like you have an opportunity where you're working with a client. Organically, issues around values came up, and then organically they started asking questions on what's next. And now you're trying to figure out, well, how do I take this values work and bring it into all the other aspects and operationalize it sort of for the company?
Correct.
Got it. Rachelle, is there anything you would add to your question or to Dawn's question?
Yeah, so listening to Dawn's challenge that he's dealing with, it brings to mind that almost like that initial assessment in the company where you're really determining what the needs are. And it sounds like in Dawn's engagement coaching these leaders, he's seeing a gap, so to speak, and that needs to be, I would think, brought to the attention of the powers that be and addressed? And how do you do that?
All right, so let's dive in. Let's first talk about values and how values relate to organizations and where they are. So I want to begin with talking about corporate values and where they come from, and what's legitimate corporate values and what are the wish for corporate values that aren't really true, that actually make employees absolutely insane. So corporate values, where they actually come from, is originally from the founder. So I'm going to go back to my Disney example, or my Disney experience. So a lot of the values that the corporate culture were built around related to Walt's unique personality, around the originality or what have you. And then as the company started to grow, that there was different types of leaders who got in there, and then the values changed because Walt was no longer, and trying to always go back to what Walt was a shackle to the future. So there's something about values, is values are what people actually believe. So it really is built around who the executive team actually are and how they actually make decisions. But a lot of times when we do strategy work and we try to help them articulate values, they become more aspirational values that nobody really lives by. So where Disney wound up going is we had our values around openness, honesty, balance. Work-life balance was one of ours. And that was not a value that we held at the company. We valued excellence. That for sure was one of the values. So when you have those kinds of values and they're up on a break room wall, it makes employees crazy because it's all of that cognitive dissonance. So as you embark in the values work, it really has to unearth what they actually believe and they will live by, and bringing it more to the explicitness so that they are A, making decisions through the filters of those values, and then B, they're actually attracting people who live those values in a more congruent way. But what doesn't really work is when people try to take a round peg and put it into a square hole and say, you need to, do this. You can't change somebody else's, well, you all know this as coaches. You can't change somebody else's values, and then people get punished for being who they are. So they get hired for being who they are, and then they get punished for who they are. So that's so before we get into the tactics around values, let's just get some of the challenges around values out on the table. So I don't know, what do you agree, disagree, similar experience?
Yeah, what's interesting to me is that one of the pillars to the coaching I do are individual values. And so it starts there as a core place for us to create that baseline. And so what we're talking about here is that, that alignment between the individual and the corporation. But if they don't know what the corporation's values are, they're going to make it up. They're going to, they're going to have their version of what it is. And I think that breaks down teams. I think there's too many perspectives and there's not enough alignment. And I think that can be a challenge for the company.
Yeah, I'm right there with Don. And what I'm seeing, or what I hear, that most leaders do have values, but they don't live by them. They're not walking the walk and talking the talk. It's all BS. And people pick up on that. Those who are clear on their values and live by their values. Same thing, Don. I always start with values. If you don't know your personal values, how are you going to be able to align with a company's values? And then and this is where I see the big challenge is the corporations profess they values, by either A, to Betsy's point, the leadership team changes and the values shift with them. And it's like chasing your tail for the people that work there because the values are always changing.
Here's an example of something where it's like, okay, I know my values, but you need to look at the business model. So if you look at what Jim Collins says about good to great, is these companies live by the values, but there's not one set of values that works. A lot of it based on, the organization and how they are. So like you would have a Harley Davidson, and they believe freedom, that's like a big value versus, Disney, it's like magic and, other things. So you kind of have to look at that one. But sometimes like different organizations, maybe even with under the same umbrella, will have different values for a strategic purpose. Like it's okay that finance has a different set of values than maybe HR, but it's figuring out how do we come together, in a more shared agreement. So this, I'm going to show, this is an agenda that on how to do inter-team partnering. And so one of the things that you might have, so when I worked at Disney, we had the Imagineers who were very, very different than the operators. The Imagineers are the ones who come up with the concepts. They're very creative. They're very true to their storylines. They believe in all of that. Operators are much more pragmatic. They are driven to get things done, and they have different value sets, and they should retain those different value sets in some ways. So corporate wise, we kept those departments separate. Now, where you bring values to life is, it could be there's just basic human values that we all want to agree on, but you do it through like more inner team partnering. So this is a process that we use to try to create alignment between different types of departments. So what you do is you do a session where you go over first people's agendas and biases and raise that to the surface. So you could call it values, or you could just say agendas and biases, you know, around like this particular department, you know, like they're so pie in the sky. They're so aspirational. Like they have no reality. That's an agenda, you know, or a bias, you know, versus like they're just so focused. Like they don't care about the big picture. They're just, you know, like any of that kind of stuff you might say is you raise all of these agendas and biases so that you can do the heart of what gets past the values conflicts are really those norms and commitments. You know, like norms and commitments are things that, you know, how do we agree to work together and partner together, and you have come up with specific behavioral. So the thing about values is you almost have to take it out of the aspirational aspect of the values, like openness, honesty, you know, trust, and you got to turn it into concrete behaviors that you could actually hold people accountable to. Like that's where things get operationalized. So people don't necessarily get as inspired all the time by, you know, like these big picture things. It would be like when we make decisions, we act in a particular way, you know. So if it's important for me that I don't like being misunderstood, you know, no matter if you might not have that as a value, I might ask though for the people who are close to me to say, I really want you to ask questions before making assumptions. That is very important to me. That's a norm I need you to kind of go with. So in every aspect of values, you might say, all right, this might give us into the ballpark of who we are related to the culture that we want to create. But in every instance, in order to operationalize it, it has to get turned into behavioral descriptions of some kind, you know, that everybody can agree on and hold themselves accountable to, and that you could actually see. So it has to go from the values into behaviors, and it has to be behaviors relative to a particular situation. I'll stop there and let you comment.
The one question I have and I get it. So each department, they all have their own different personalities and jobs. So it makes sense that the values would be different. But as a corporation, I think in my mind, I'm seeing an umbrella values, a set of values that makes an umbrella over all of those departments. That might be more aspirational, but to your point, it's about behavior, modeling behavior.
So you might say from a strategy standpoint, so I'm going to pull up another document. Okay. I have like a bunch of stuff up. So if it's not hitting bang on, you know, just let me know. So you going back to Disney, you know, so I did a lot of work with the Imagineers and the operators when we were launching the Animal Kingdom. And so we took some of the aspirational, the brand promise, and we turned it into what I would call decision-making filters. And this is the kind of stuff where everybody can kind of see it. So say, all right, what's important for us to achieve our business objectives, you know, like, so accomplishment, achievement might be something, but it's like translated down to, here's what our specific goals are. Or to become a viable Disney park, you know, that is more like Disney, to achieve product balance or that kind of thing. But then that turned into these filters for products. So let's say when we were creating new attractions or that kind of thing, it would turn it into, now everybody has to come to agreement around these decision-making filters. So this is how it gets translated. So strategy turns into operational reality is when all the aspirational stuff, so the mission, vision, brand, all the values, and it turns into decision-making filters. So, but then you could layer on to say, all right, here's the core of what we need for attractions. This is what the filters would be for decision-making. But then let's say you were adding in and you were working with the entertainment team, you know, then you layer it on to say, all right, well, we're going to still use all the other questions, but then we're going to add these other ones. And that's how you get it translated, is if everything turns it into it, because where culture happens and where strategy gets implemented and where everything happens is how people take in information and make decisions. And so if you can discipline the organization around decision-making filters, that's when everything comes to life. So this is a more detailed version, but at Disney, at least on the basic level, we agreed on the three-legged stool, which was more powerful than the openness, honesty, integrity, or what have you. Like that stuff was like lovely break room wall stuff that we could say, oh, look how aspirational we are. But when it came down to it, when I was an OD consultant at Disney and we had to pitch any initiative, nothing got improved unless we could prove how it benefited the guests, the cast, and the business results. So the guest experience was in a particular way, the cast experience. And so unless I could show how it's going to hit all three, nothing got approved. And so that's where when leaders put the decision-making filters out, and then they're rigid about not letting things through. Because if you start to slide and say, we agree on this, and it turns into these decision-making filters, but we're going to redline this thing over here, that's when it all falls apart. So it really begins a strategy going to decision-making filters. Decision-making filters, you can see it. And then we'll say the same for competencies. We'll talk about competencies in a bit, but this is how it goes from strategy. And this, you can follow this. You could say, all right, so I'm working for the animal kingdom and I'm trying to come up with a show idea. So does it, will it achieve this? Will it achieve this? Will it achieve this? Will it achieve this? It's almost like a decision tree, and then once it's like, it spits it out here, now we know that's a good idea. Questions, comments, feedback on that part?
Just taking it in right now.
This
For
is
me,
really,
I'm seeing taking it from BS to behavior. Like these filters allow you to measure it to see if you're really walking the walk versus just flapping your gums.
Yeah, the more you can, okay, first off, can I give you more snaps? Because that was a brilliant phrase. We have to remember BS to behaviors.
I stole it. I have to say, I did steal it. We have to give credit to Brene Brown for that one, but I love it.
Darn, I was going to give you credit. Okay, whoop, whoop, Brene. All right. But I think that's the thing for consultants, coaches, and wherever you are, is it has to be observable and measurable. Like you have to see when somebody violates it. So even when you're working on the norm exercises, you can't say, well, we're going to trust each other. It's like, well, I don't know. What does trust mean? What does that look like? But you could say, I can trust you is if you, I need you to ask my input on decisions that affect me. Like, well, that I could see. Did you do it or did you not do it? Did you assume positive intent? I could see that versus if somebody, disagree with the idea, not the person. You could see that. You can hold that one. And similar for strategy. It's not worth it just to say, more vague around like, okay, well, we want to achieve, this is the sum of stuff like, Rachelle, I know you and I did very, very beginning when we did your business build process is we clarified your intentions, and that's where the intentions are. It's like, if you can get it really clear and say, all right, here's my filters, like if I'm doing my business because I want more time with my family, and then you keep going off like I wound up doing, where I was working crazy hours and the kids were home with the nanny. It's like, okay, I'm clearly violating my own strategy, because I could see that, but if I didn't make that explicit. So I think just as important it is, I think for us coaches and consultants, like we want to be all aspirational, but it's more important to get like the outcomes and the filters. It may not feel as aspirational for us, but if you're really working with corporate and even with individuals, is you got to make it really concrete so when you're violating it. So
I'm taking, yeah, if you see me looking down, I'm taking notes. So.
Oh, okay, good. Yay. So if you're taking notes, then I know you're liking it.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So let's talk about, do you want anything else on strategy or on that in general, or do you want to go more into competencies or how to do an executive development program?
I think competencies is probably next from where you're leaving off.
All right, let me talk to you about, well, let me back up and talk about a development program. So I'm showing you a scrubbed up version of a proposal I did for a client a million years ago. And so this is the story. I tell the story a lot where I had a client who really, really wanted to work with me, and they wanted me to do an executive training. They wanted to work with me so much that they handed me my competitor's proposal. And they said, Here it is. It's a 2-day work session. If you can meet it or beat it, you'll get the job. And it was for like something like $7,000. And I looked at that. I'm like, that's not going to get them any outcomes. Like, because, just doing a training program alone is not going to do the work.
Right.
And so this is where we all get tempted, especially when money's low or we're worried about whatever. It's like, well, I'll just take that, I just want to take that, but we got to back a client up. So what I wound up doing with the client is, and this is the actual proposal I tell in the story, is I got them to articulate what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And at that particular time is they wanted this development program because they were trying to grow the business, and they couldn't grow their business organically anymore. They needed to grow through merger and acquisition. So they really wanted to do this program so they could have executives in place, ready to go, so that if they got a new acquisition, they could just plop a already trained, developed executive ready to go. And so I was working with a broader strategic thing that a 2-day workshop was not going to achieve that particular outcome. So I got them to pivot to talk about our goal here is to get you ready for this merger and acquisition strategy. So really working through like, well, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? What are the outcomes? Going up a little bit higher. Rachelle, you've seen me talk about this over and over again, of moving from, the solution request to the behavioral change to the business impact to the ROI. So the more that when you're actually talking to the client, that you can get to the business impact, not even the behavioral, the business impact. What are they actually trying to do? If you go up the pyramid, if you will, to this higher level, and you see everything under that filter, then everything's in play. If you look at it from the bottom up, then there's very little in play. Then you're just selling a methodology. So the idea here, so to answer the opportunity that you have done, is the first thing I would recommend is you got to back up and say, what problem am I trying to solve? Why do they want to develop these leaders? So in what way? So you can kind of say, whatever the methodology. So if they say, oh, well, what's next? Can we do more? You would say, that is super awesome that you want to do more. But before we get into this, let's back up. Let's talk about it. If your leaders were fundamentally different than where they are today, what's the behavior change? Where are they today? Where would you like them to be? And then if that behavior change, what difference would it make to the business? And if we made these business changes, what would that mean to your bottom line? And get them to quantify that. And you want to position yourself up here. So even if you're with this, and I know, Don, you and I go back and forth on the differences between coaching and consulting. My opinion is, and you could disagree, but I believe that if you're working for a company, even if you're a coach or a consultant, it's a B2B consulting business because you're trying to help the enterprise, you're trying to help the organization, and they have business outcomes. So if you're going to be a coach in that environment, go for the most strategic thing, even if you don't personally want to do it. Make sure you're positioning yourself, because you can still land it and bring other people who might do process stuff or other things you might not want to do, and you can still work one-on-one. But it's a natural progression from a transferable skill set. Is if you can coach an individual, you can coach a team. If you can stand up and you can facilitate a meeting, you can do a workshop. So you got transferable skills, why not? And if part of the reason why you're going to do some corporate work is to make the most of that opportunity so you can really have more time in your passion business, then make the most of that opportunity. Go for it, and don't worry about the labels, per se. Just saying, let's go after it. So you position it from that standpoint. But then the most important part for me on the proposal is the roadmap, the methodology. So the client asks for X, and I never care about what the client asks for. Not that I don't care, I do care. But I just assume it's a starting point, because I have a firm belief, and Rachelle's heard me say it 1,000 times, the client is never right. They never know what they want, and they shouldn't. Just like I wouldn't go to a doctor, Don, you go to the doctor and say, I think you need to do, XYZ surgery, and this is how it's supposed to be. You're like, well, you're the doctor, I hope you know what you're doing. The client's going to come to you and say, I hope you know what you're doing. And so to me, the methodology part is where you put this into a bigger context and you say, I know exactly how to help you. This is what you need to do. So when I take that request for the methodology, I put it into this broader solution. So step one is, before we talk about any leadership development, step one is y'all need to get an agreement around your leadership framework, meaning the competencies. Translate the values to competencies, but what competencies are you going to do? Then you need to do the gap between where we are today and where we want to be. Then we need to implement solutions, and then we need to implement and sustain those results. That could be a bigger thing. So whenever I do a custom executive development program, I begin with a facilitated discussion with the senior leaders to come to agreement on whatever their leadership framework is. So the first place is to have a customized competency model that relates to the culture, relates to their starting point, is in their language, but is still behavioral. So now I can go back into my competency model. So here's an example of a competency model that I might use. Let's see if I can find a prettier version. This is in my Make Every Position Count ebook that is on my in my store. So if you are interested in getting this ebook, you can go to my store and get this ebook. Here we go. So from an executive standpoint, from my perspective, there's competencies from top talent that everybody would have. So here's the core model. Like these are the 6 attributes of top talent in general. That at their core, they have character and integrity, that they can be trusted. That top talent has capacity where they can take additional responsibility, a consistent contribution, they have a can-do attitude, they can develop relationships, and they're committed and they're passionate. You could say this would be for everybody. Would you agree that all employees should really share these? Yes?
Yes.
So if then somebody moves up the ladder and then they become a manager, they still have those core, and then they add in, if they're a manager level, then they have these 3 competencies. So they know who, know how, so they know how to get it done. So they understand who their people are, they're masters of their field of expertise, and they can get day-to-day results done. That's a manager. What happens in organizations is, especially when they're small to growing, is you might have a bunch of like top talent, and then eventually they have to learn some management competencies because now they're leading others to get stuff done. But as they grow, then managers, a lot of times when people move into executive roles, they just act like they're more managers on crack, like with just a bigger span of control, and they still act like managers. When the reality is the executive leadership role is a fundamentally different role. So what you do is you swap out those 3 manager competencies for executive competencies. So if you're working, that's where you have to be clear on who you're going after. Which type of leader are you trying to develop? Are you trying to lead the team at the top, or are you trying to help managers? Because you're using a different set of competency models, and I would present a different type of competencies, because leadership is not leadership. Supervisory leadership is not the same as executive leadership. Executive leadership, what makes them, so this is your magic word, Dawn, is presence, is that magnetic personal quality that energizes and inspires others. It's a competency, and it's also like an X factor. The strategic big picture thinking is important to executives. That's not important for a manager. In fact, you don't really need that at all for a manager, because you need a manager to get stuff done on the day-to-day. Accountability versus responsibility, meaning they just get stuff done for other people. Working smarter, not harder, where they have to be highly efficient given their big spans of control. And the political savvy. They have to have political savvy to be an exceptional executive. So you have to have that as a starting point. So you have to shape their thinking. So if you are going to help a client take the values, you have to take the values and say, well, what does this look like to the team at the top in terms of the behaviors? But you have to start off with a foundational understanding of what an executive is versus a manager level. Not the same. So that's the starting point. And so there's more details in here around, what these are. What I would do with a client as the first order up for bids is I might put this type of tool in front of them and say, all right, here's a competency model that you can use as a starting point. Our goal here is that, we could change the language, we can add, change, and delete, but I need to give you a starting point. My experience with executives is just to facilitate a conversation about competencies without a starting point doesn't work for them, because they like a straw person. But then taking something off the shelf that works for any other company, isn't a success factor either, because what works at Disney is not going to work for a manufacturing company. They're very, very different companies with very, very different cultures and very different types of people. So off the shelf doesn't work. So to me, the middle is give them a straw person that they can poke holes in and think about it from the angle of their particular organization. So I might put something like this in front of the executive team. I might give it to them ahead of time so that the executives have a chance to think about it and say, all right, based on these, agree. And then out of these behaviors, what would you add, change, delete, customize? What language would you use? But making sure, because I would still push them when we were in there, we have to still keep it at the behavior level. Like, so if you could see here, that you can evaluate somebody on a 5-point scale on to what degree they do these things. To what degree do they develop and maintain win-win relationships and partnership. You could rate it on a scale of 5. Communicates in an organized and persuasive manner. You can rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. So it's really getting them to use the language, but you could change it up based on their particular organization. You could change out accountability versus responsibility. Let's say it was like sort of a rebellious company, or maybe this one, it would be like, do epic shit, get stuff done. If that works for them, if they're a little bit more rebellious. This one, instead of political savvy, it might say, if it was a friendlier company, it might say build collaborative relationships, or something like that. So you can change it. So that's the starting point, and that's where you go into the 360s from there. But that's the first order up for bids, working with the executive team. So let's say I was starting from soup to nuts, I would work on the strategy first, like big picture, the strategy, then I turned it into, the mission, vision, and I would move it into that decision-making filters that I shared with you on that one. Then I would have the conversation to say, in order to deliver this strategy, what type of executive leadership do we need in order to deliver on this strategy based on our strategy? Like what's more important, what type of executive leadership? I wouldn't touch management until I did executive leadership, because I'm going from first the strategy, get that set. And then you would say, in order to deliver on this, what we say we want to accomplish, now, how do our leaders need to behave? Questions, comments, feedback on that? We're good?
Soaking it all in.
So this is that strategic difference from, what got you here won't get you there is core in much of the executives that I work in. And so I really like this format because it's inclusive, and I see it being something that could easily move into what I do. I did want to go back to one thing, and that is that you've known me a long time, and I consulted for 30 years. So I have a definition in terms of what the skill sets are between coaching and consulting. But the piece that I want to share is when I work with a client, I say, okay, I'm putting on my consulting hat, and that's a part of my business. But they're clear now that we're actually moving into problem solving versus what we're trying to accomplish in coaching. So.
And I think where you could find the alignment between the two is, and even if we don't say problem solving, is saying I'm providing process leadership. So I'm providing either process leadership over the organizational issues, or I'm providing process leadership over the personal development. And that's where you could say the same. I want to validate what you said on the what got you here won't get you here, won't get you there. 99% of the time when they call a consultant or coach, it's because they're moving from one life cycle of maturity to the next.
Right.
And what got them there really won't get them there. And so when you're dealing with executive development for the first time, it's because they've gotten to a growth stage where they're ready for executives and not managers. And I think if I had it all my way for most of these companies that I see that wind up struggling, is they don't really understand the journey of executive leadership, and they still operate like managers. So when the company gets bigger, they still operate at this. This is where you have people say, oh my gosh, we have all these executives who have helicopter management. And that's because they've never been trained to think like executives. And the beauty of what happens with executive development is if you start detaching, you don't really need to know the line of business that you came from to be an exceptional executive leader. And so when you can get them to build executive competencies, then you really have a fluid organization for however you're going to grow, because then you can keep moving people around. It doesn't matter, just because you came out of, sales doesn't mean you can only lead sales. You could lead finance. You could lead, well, I don't know, finance has some regulations, but you could lead, you could lead operations, and you should. One of the best executive development experiences that I would recommend for all, I'll tell you how to options around the executive development, but number one is move them around. When you move executives around, if you really want to get a company to the next level, move them around, because then what happens is they go into a new area and they're not connected to the past, so they don't feel like bad when things are, you can really improve things when you don't feel guilty that you're the one who helped create them. And so that's a great way to grow the organization and grow your leaders at the same time. So so once you get the leaders to do that, then you move into the executive development process. So now let's get into competencies. I'm going to clean this up so I can show you other things. So I don't have the assessment itself right now, but what you could do is now we go through these 4 phases of the executive development. So what I've done in the past is I take those competencies and I turn them into an assessment tool using this framework. So you figure out like, well, who's my high potentials who are going to be in this particular program? So whether you're going to work with an executive team, now they're all in play. So if you're trying to do executive team building with an executive team, they're all in play. But if they're using it from like with that particular client I was telling you about for a succession planning, then you have to kind of be strategic to say, well, who gets invited, into this? It could be the next level down. So you have to decide who's going to be in play. And then you set it up where you do the 360, where you have feedback from the boss, from peers, from direct reports, like you get all of them. And so that's the first part of the process. Then phase 2 is now everybody gets the same report. And then you do the feedback sessions with everybody. So Don, you've completed phase 1 and 2 or a version, or maybe you did phase 2 with all the leaders. You could back up and do phase 1. But then how you turn it into team building is then if you have a consistent framework, then you could see cut across the board to say, where are all the issues that everybody has in common? Like you get everybody to decide their own individual action plans. And then you cut across and say, all right, here's where it's all together. So now we have 2 paths. It's the collective strength development, which turns into the team building and other things because they're growing and learning together. So you can action learning new things. So with one of my clients, they were working on like strategy was an issue, so we did an action learning situation around, what is it that they needed to learn about strategic thinking? And then I incorporated strategic planning into it. Or one team was working on the political savvy and we did like a horizontal alignment, kind of process in it. So you can incorporate other things. And then you could add on the individual strength, the strength stuff. So with a 360, what you do is you need some tech support if you're going to do it. I'm a huge fan of customization. I do not like off-the-shelf 360s. It would be like saying, here's what the generic competencies are for what a perfect partner should be in a romantic relationship. Now we're going to evaluate against this. I'm like, well, that's generic because you don't know what the love language is of the other person. When you can customize it, it's like, well, this is based on this particular organization because what the standard is everything. So I'm absolutely not a fan of that. So we've already kind of covered that. So then but then you got to have like the tech support in order to do that. There's a lot of easy ways to do this now, especially compared to when I started doing this, back in 2010. But, you go through the process where saying, all right, the HBL is a high performing leader, and the boss agree on the raters. So it's important that they figure out who gets to be the people that they're getting feedback from. Then they get notified that they're going to be involved and they get an email to participate in the survey. Then they know that they're going to get the outside consultant or coach will review it. Then they're going to figure out what we need to do on the whole. So there's a lot of stuff in here. So here's like some different forms. So you could hand this out and say, here's all the people that you want to include in your thing. You need communication to the rater, the raters and the timeline. So that's the process. And then and here's a sample of a report. So this is where I took the competency model and I made it into a report. So, the framework was the same and then you just swap out the numbers, so I made up some of the words of what I wanted them to say here. And then, we got all of the feedback, like here's the high level overview of like, what your leader said, what partner said, direct reports, the average with you, the average without you. So you could look at this particular person who thinks that, they're like, you can see where they think they are doing better than other people or where they think they're worse, or a different view, where you can kind of see where they peak. And then you go into each competency. So it's still kind of interesting because then you can start evaluating, where people think that you're doing good and not good. I really like this table. Hold on. If you can't see it easily, I can make it bigger. Is where this is a rank ordering from top to bottom around what the other people say, from an average, and then what you say, and then you can see, well, there's a huge discrepancy or where everybody's on the same page. Then, in the survey, I give the open-ended, so then you can cut and paste the open-ended into this. And then you have a planning. So you have them think through the planning, and then you as the coach will sit down with them and you identify, what is this particular person's strengths and weaknesses. And then the two of you come to agreement on your action plan, whatever that person's goals are and what they need. And you get clarity on what do they, how do they learn? How do they want to learn this? What are you going to do? So you get that individual, but then you have a different level support. Then you might have a team report where you might give a collective perspective on the organization on the whole. So this is everybody's results together, so you can kind of cut across from all the individual action plans, and then you could look on the whole to say, well, what in general, where is everybody at? So what's the strengths and opportunities? Like, this one kind of pops a little bit lower, on attracting talent, the same rank ordering. And you could say, all right, well, what do we need to focus on? Yeah, obviously attracting and recruiting top talent was not good. And some of the other behaviors. So then you could say on the whole, so this is where you bring all of this to the executive team. So for me, the stakeholder management all along the way is really important. So you kick it off with the executive team around, here's the competencies, and then here's all the people who are in the program. Then you go off and you get your team report, you do all the 360s, you get the team report, you get the individual report, you meet with everybody individually. Then you get yourself set up for the conversation with the executive team to say, all right, well, here's some themes around action plans that everybody needs to work on, where everybody's focused on. And then here's the team report. And then you can decide together, like, well, what skill sets do we really want to go after? Where do we think we're strong? Where, so is there some skill sets that we want to strengthen? Is there weaknesses that we want to shore up? What do we want to do? And then how do we want to go about doing this? So now you're ready for, group training experiences, group learning experiences. And then you can kind of get more precise, like more, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like just more razor focused on what you need to do. So it's not like just throwing this generic thing, and then when you get clear on people's individual, you get clear on people's individual preferences and how they like to learn, because you really have to know how people learn. You can be more specific around, who everybody needs. So a lot of times for executives, especially executive development, mentoring is good. But there's also in coaching, which you all know how to do, but there's other things that you can do. So you can provide more of a comprehensive kind of training experience. So the expert exposure, executives really love to learn, there's podcasts galore, you can, give them the latest thinking, best practices, stuff that would stretch their thinking. Having like a community accountability partner is another part of it. So the training is just one thing, and then you could do the coaching. You could do mentoring, but another big development experience for the mentoring is setting them up as mentors. But then I really like stretch assignments. Stretch assignments and rotations are really good. So one of the things I always do when I do an org design is I look for the high potentials and I put them on my project teams when we're leading initiatives, because that's an executive development experience, and executives typically are action learning. So the more that you get them out of the classroom and you get them to do something, that the better off they're going to be. So you could have you. And the thing about us coaches is we tend to be reflection biased, but not necessarily balancing it with the action. Bringing a little bit more balance between. And consultants tend to be more action, and not as much reflection. So if you want to bring a little bit more balance, you could do a little bit of coaching and then get them to do something where they have to try it out, but not necessarily in the same exact environment. If you're trying to develop executives, it's not necessarily the same as saying, all right, try this with your team, because you're not trying to get them to be managers. You're trying to get them to think different. So I would be forcing them to say, all right, you need to go out and, get buy-in for an idea, so what idea do you want to champion in the organization? And let's go after it. And what will, and then you could process what would keep them from creating those types of things, or proactively advocate a strategy. If you're going up the ladder, You need to be able to think strategically, bigger picture. So I want you to go pitch something, pitch something that you want to lead, pitch an initiative, and recruit the team, and let's see how you do. That would be more interesting than, say this with your employee tomorrow and see if they'll feel like more happy. Like that's great if you're a brand new supervisor. So if you're doing management coaching, know who you're talking to. I'm talking in this one, I'm executive biased on this one because Don, you asked me about executives, not
Right.
managers. So we want to make sure we're developing executives, not managers. Executives don't have to say hello to their employees every single day, because executives have high achieving people who don't need that and don't want that. And that's annoying, and they don't really care that my children's name, but they do want to know that my talent, and you're going to position me somewhere, and you're going to be, if you're at that level, you have a different type of employee base. So you have to, one size does not fit all. Everybody does not need a manager who knows their name. I don't need a manager who knows my name. I need a manager who knows my goals and knows my talent. So that's how you move it into, a bigger development experience.
A lot of information, Betsy. As always, over delivering as always.
I feel like we could do a whole nother hour just on the 360 and executive development alone.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we for sure could.
Okay.
And if you check out the toolbox, I know, Rachelle, you have the consultant toolbox. And for any of you who are watching this video and want to have access to tools like this, please check out the consultant's toolbox, these kinds of tools, because I have a boatload of them.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I love that toolbox. I haven't been in there in a while, and I want to take a look at this ebook too. That's pretty extensive.
Oh yeah, this ebook's in there. This ebook comes free if you get the toolbox. So for sure you can get this ebook. Anything else that we want to wrap up before I wrap up the video?
There's just so much more here to unpack that we didn't touch on.
Yeah, I'm gonna need some time to process this and then come back with the questions that I have.
Oh, I've got something in my computer. So, well, thank you guys for being on the hot seat, and I hope this was valuable.
Super.
And
it was.
Yeah. For anybody who wants some access to my tools and behind the scenes stuff and is willing to be in a hot seat video, please email me at betsy@betsyjordyn.com. Let me know your need, let me know your request, and if you're willing to do a video like this, and I will for sure do something like this for you, and we can get the best practices out there. A lot of people question why I want to get the best practices out there, and I'm on a mission to help consultants and coaches get off the sidelines and start making a difference. And I have tools that will help you get you there. And I don't want my tools sitting in a computer rather than out there making a difference. So it's very important that we are out there making a difference and not wasting time. Like, why would we waste time Googling when I got something for you? I got tons of stuff and I like content. So you can imagine what my poor computer is like. So definitely take me up on that offer. It's betsy@betsyjordyn.com. If you want the toolbox, you can also check out betsyjordyn.com with a Y. Thank you so much. And we'll see you later.
Thank you,
Betsy.